One night above the Atlantic Ocean, near the equator, Air France Flight 447 cruises on its way to Paris. Only a few minutes later, Flight 447 would vanish over the Atlantic. What happened to Flight 447, and what caused them to disappear over the Atlantic in one of the safest aircraft in the world? And what happened to the people on board? On the evening of May 31st, 2009, Air France Flight 447 is boarding at Rio de Janeiro's Callao International Airport. The aircraft involved in the accident is a 4-year-old Airbus A330-200 registered as Foxtrot Golf Zulu Charlie Papa, having its first flight on February 25th, 2005, and being delivered to Air France around 2 months later, having around 18,870 flight hours at the time of the accident. The crew that were flying Flight 447 at this time were Captain Marc Dubois, who had 11,000 flight hours and had joined Air France on February 1988. Next, we have Relief First Officer David Robert, who had 6,547 flying hours and he had joined Air France on July 1998. And lastly, we had First Officer Pierre Cedric Bonin, who had 2,936 flying hours and he had joined Air France in October 2003. Now on board Flight 447, there were around 228 people on board, 216 passengers and 12 crew, majority of them being French, Brazilian, and German citizens. The aircraft was also carrying 18,732 kilograms of cargo along with 7,400 kilograms of fuel. Flight 447 was cleared to start their engines and leave the stand on 7:10 local time. They then taxied to the runway and prepared for takeoff. Flight 447 took off from Rio de Janeiro at 7:29 Brazilian Standard Time, scheduled to arrive in Paris at 11:03 Central Eastern European Time, for an estimated flight time of 10 hours and 34 minutes. The plane then started climbing to 35,000 feet, following through the eastern coast of Brazil. When the plane passed waypoint Intal off the coast of Natal at 1:35 a.m., now being June 1st, the aircraft left Recife control around the same time it passed waypoint Intal. Around 1:49 a.m., Flight 447 leaves Atlantico control and enters a communication dead zone near the equator. Shortly after 1:52 a.m., the 10-hour flight time permitted before a pilot had to take a break was nearing. But because the flight had 3 pilots, each pilot could take a break in the A330's rest cabin. Around 1:55 a.m., Captain Dubois woke up First Officer Robert to take his place before leaving the cockpit around 2 a.m. A few minutes later, at 2:06, they warned the cabin crew that they were entering a zone of turbulence. 2 minutes later, at 2:08, the plane started flying through icy weather conditions. At 2:10:05, the autopilot had disconnected and so the flight displays had begun malfunctioning. Afterwards, Flight Officer Bonin took control of the aircraft and put the plane into the nose-up position, causing the plane to start climbing out of flight level 350. The stall warning had sounded for a few seconds after Bonin pushed the nose up, with the airspeed indicator abruptly dropping from 275 knots to 60 knots. By then, the pilots were confused with what was going on, considering some of the displays were showing the wrong information. Bonin was overcorrecting the plane's movements, which caused it to roll back and forth to the side. But, after a few seconds, at 2:10:36, the airspeed indicator showed the correct speed at 223 knots. At 2:10:51, the stall warning started to sound in the cockpit as the plane started reaching its maximum cruising altitude of 38,000 feet. Despite this, the plane still continued pitching up, with Bonin pulling back on the side stick causing the plane to pitch up. At 2:11:10, the plane reached 38,000 feet and the wings started to lose lift. Despite the engines at max power, the plane was now starting to plummet. The plane's angle of attack went from 16 degrees to around 30 as the plane started to fall out of the sky. 30 seconds later, Captain Dubois went into the cockpit, seeing the panicked and confused pilots as the plane was seemingly not responding to the controls. By then, the plane's angle of attack has gone over 40 degrees. Flight 447 was now plummeting at a rate of around 10,000 feet per minute. By 3 minutes, the plane would have impacted the Atlantic Ocean. By 2:12, Bonin put the plane's nose down, which caused the stall warning to trigger. So Bonin put the nose back up, which made the stall warning stop triggering. At around the same time, Captain Dubois exclaimed, "I don't have control of the airplane!" And Bonin exclaimed in turn that he had been pulling the plane's nose back the entire time. By now, the plane has gone too far down for the stall to be recoverable. Bonin gave control back to Robert, who tried to recover the plane from the stall by pushing the plane's nose down. At 2:14:17, the ground proximity warning triggered, signaling that they were about to impact the ocean. A few more seconds later, at 2:14:28, the plane's flight data and cockpit voice recorders stopped recording as they impacted the Atlantic at around 250 kilometers per hour. Everyone on board was killed instantly on impact from blunt force trauma of impacting the ocean. From the speed of the plane, it was instantly pancaked on impact. Flight 447 crashed on 2:14:28. It was due to enter Senegalese airspace around 2 to 3 a.m. When Flight 447 failed to contact Senegalese air traffic control around 4 a.m. and there was no response from nearby Air France Flight 459, Brazilian, French, and Senegalese forces sent search and rescue aircraft and ships from nearby Fernando de Noronha, an island off the coast of Brazil, and Dakar, Senegal. Although on the morning of June 1st, only a few hours after the plane disappeared, they already presumed there would be no survivors from the simple nature of the disappearance. The next day, June 2nd, the search party found the first pieces of wreckage. As the search continued, more and more wreckage was found, with the first bodies being found on June 6th. The day after, in June 7th, the first major piece of wreckage was found, with the vertical stabilizer or tailfin being found floating on the ocean. But the main wreckage itself, along with the plane's black boxes, hadn't been found yet. It would only be found years later in 2011, with the black boxes being recovered on May 7th. The search and rescue effort ended a few months later, with 154 bodies being recovered, with only 74 still not found even till this day. With the black boxes and other important pieces of wreckage found, they began to investigate why Flight 447 had vanished from the sky. The investigation later concluded that Flight 447 mainly crashed due to the pitot tubes of the aircraft, which were getting clogged by ice, which caused the aforementioned loss of display, which in turn led to a chain of events mainly involving pilot error, as the flight crew weren't able to correct or identify the fact that they were stalling. They concluded that the combination of factors such as a loss of consistent display from airspeed and pilot error, stemming from the confusion in the cockpit leading the flight crew to ultimately be unable to catch and correct the stall, caused the crash. In the aftermath, the flight from Rio de Janeiro to Paris was retired, being renamed to Air France Flight 445. The mechanics of Air France later found several reports about pitot tube errors, including one from Flight 445 at nearly the same time where Flight 447 later disappeared. Airbus later sent a service bulletin to all A330 and A340 carriers to replace the pitot tubes with a new model, specifically the one from Goodrich, as the old model were no longer to be used following the other safety incidents before and after Flight 447. Flight 447 would later go down in history as one of the most infamous air disasters. With the nature of its disappearance in the Atlantic using one of the safest aircraft in the world, the lessons learned from its disappearance will never be forgotten, and it will continue to improve air safety measures till this day. Hey guys, I'm not dead! Anyways, I'm sorry that took so long. There's no excuse. I got busy with schoolwork and all that, but I got a random hit of motivation last March, so hopefully I could make more soon. And also, I practically locked myself into this by making one really stupid decision. So, yeah, see you next time. Bye!